Hey guys! Today I bring you a story that will shake your beliefs. The shocking revelation of a former nun who almost died and saw Jesus. Get ready to discover secrets the church never wanted you to know. Before we start, comment which city you are from and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more surprising stories. Let's go on this journey together. My name is Artemis Hallowell. And since childhood, I have been immersed in a universe of faith, where every prayer, every ritual was the promise of a safe path toward salvation. I was born into a fervent Catholic family, where sacred words echoed constantly at meals and in daily conversations. I remember the stories my grandmother told, full of miracles and divine interventions, and how, in my eyes, these narratives painted a world full of hope and protection. It was in this environment that the seed of devotion was planted, making me, from a very young age, feel called by a greater force. At the age of 18, with my heart overflowing with fervor and the desire to give myself completely to this divine calling, I entered the convent. There, my life was limited to long periods of prayer, rigorous fasting, and the detailed study of the doctrines of the Church. Each day was a sacred cycle, where time unfolded into moments destined for a single purpose, getting closer to God. The walls of the convent, lined with stained glass that filtered the sunlight in 1,000 colors, served as silent witnesses to my total surrender. I remember one cold morning when, upon waking up, I heard the distant sound of a bell. That melody, soft and, at the same time, imposing, seemed to call each nun to another journey of faith. I, with teary eyes and a racing heart, headed towards the chapel. Each step echoed in the immensity of silence, and the expectation of encountering the divine presence filled every inch of the environment. Today, perhaps, I feel God's grace more intensely than on any other day, I thought as I clasped my hands in prayer. During moments of solitary reflection, I often found myself dialoguing with my own being. Am I really getting closer to the divine, or am I just repeating gestures that I was taught? These questions arose in the midst of a whirlwind of feelings, where doubt mixed with the unshakable faith that I had always carried. However, even though my heart trembled with uncertainty, the hope of a true encounter with Jesus always drove me to continue. One afternoon, while I was alone in the convent's small library, leafing through an old prayer book, I heard Sister Evelyn's soft voice approaching. "Artemis, you seem thoughtful today. Is something bothering you?" "It's just silent questioning, Sister Evelyn. Sometimes I feel that, despite all my zeal, something still escapes me." Those words stuck in my memory, not as a confession of weakness, but as a sign that my search for meaning was legitimate and necessary. Today, when sharing this story, I do not do so with the intention of writing a book or giving lectures. I'm just an ordinary woman whose life was transformed by an experience that went beyond the limits of the physical and entered the realms of the spiritual. Every word written here carries the weight of an encounter with the divine that changed my essence. Through this story, I hope that others can, albeit in a subtle way, reflect on the true meaning of faith and realize that the spiritual journey is full of challenges, doubts, and, above all, discoveries. My routine at the convent was a meticulously orchestrated symphony of prayers, fasting, and daily obligations. I woke up before dawn, when the city was still silent and the cold penetrated to the bones. The soft sound of the bell called us all to morning prayer. As I walked through the cold corridors filled with sacred images, I felt a mix of reverence and resignation, as I knew that every second of the day was carefully planned to bring our souls closer to the divine. Upon entering the chapel, the environment was filled with the fragrance of incense and the shine of the stained glass windows that, with their colorful designs, transformed the light into a spectacle of shadows and colors. The walls, adorned with biblical scenes, served as silent reminders of the sacrifices and miracles of the past. As I knelt to pray, the soft clink of rosary beads echoed, and each repetition made me feel like I was somehow carrying out an ancient ritual. With each prayer, I tried to place my faith and hope, even if a small doubt insisted on knocking on the door of my heart. During meals, the long hours in the refectory were marked by an almost sacred silence, interrupted only by discreet murmurs about the day's readings or by memories of some forgotten prayer. On one of these occasions, as we shared plain bread and warm soup, I heard Sister Evelyn's calm voice. "Artemis, you seem distant. Is everything well with your spirit?" I, trying to hide the weight of my thoughts, replied, "I'm fine, Sister Evelyn, just reflecting on the meaning of each moment." These words, spoken with a softness that revealed concern, echoed like an unspoken prayer. The refectory, with its stone walls and windows opening onto an inner courtyard, was a microcosm of monastic discipline. Each gesture was measured, each look carried the weight of an ancient tradition. Even the simplest tasks, such as arranging one's robes or cleaning the sanctuary, were treated as acts of devotion. The routine was inflexible, and any deviation from the established order was seen as disrespect for the divine will. Thus, life, in the convent, became a silent dance where each step was choreographed by faith and obedience. However, there were times when the boredom and rigidity of everyday life caused a feeling of emptiness. On sunny afternoons, when the light invaded the cloisters, I found myself looking at the horizon, imagining the world beyond the sacred walls. On one of these occasions, while walking through the inner corridors, I heard a whisper that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. Are we really touching the sky, or just repeating the same gestures? That question, left unspoken aloud, would trouble my heart for days, reminding me that despite my devotion, something essential seemed missing. Classes on church doctrine were conducted with a seriousness that bordered on ritual. The master of ceremonies, always austere, declaimed biblical passages with an intonation that mixed reverence and authority. During a lesson on the miracles of Christ, I felt strangely distant, as if the words were becoming empty echoes in the face of the whirlwind of doubts that were beginning to take shape within me. Each day, although filled with a rigorous and orderly routine, left me with the feeling that something precious was being lost amid the repetition of rituals. The conviction that mechanical acts could, in fact, bring the divine into my life was something that slowly began to crumble under the weight of uncertainty. Over time, I realized that the fervor that once drove me to follow the rituals with unwavering devotion was now mixed with a persistent restlessness. Our morning prayers, once so pure and intense, began to turn into mere mechanical repetitions, which, despite comforting the spirit of our sisters, left an inexplicable void within me. In the midst of this whirlwind of feelings, doubts silently settled in, like shadows that lengthen at dusk. One rainy afternoon, while the sound of drops hit rhythmically against the chapel's stained glass windows, I found myself alone, in deep meditation, trying to find answers to the concerns that haunted me. The environment, with its light filtered by the rain, created a melancholic scene, where each reflection seemed to invite introspection. Suddenly, Sister Evelyn approached with her serene but worried expression. "Artemis, I see that your eyes carry a weight today," she said softly, as she sat next to me on one of the weathered wooden benches. I feel like I'm trapped in an endless cycle of repetitions," I replied, with a trembling voice. "Am I really touching the divine, or just enacting a ritual that distances me from the true meaning of faith?" His words awakened a stream of questions in me. Over the next few days, I began to pay more attention to every detail of my routine. During the long hours in the cafeteria, I noticed that even the communion shared between us was permeated by a silence that seemed more like a barrier than a sincere union. In short conversations between meals, I saw how words were carefully chosen so as not to betray any sign of uneasiness. In one of these moments, while organizing the books in the convent's small library, I came across an old volume that dealt with deep meditations on faith. As I leafed through it, I came across passages that spoke of doubts as a natural component of the spiritual quest, something necessary for the maturation of the soul. This discovery, although it caused a feeling of comfort, also awakened in me the realization that my concerns were not a sign of weakness, but a call to something greater. That night, in the gloom of the cloister, as the wind whispered secrets, among the trees in the courtyard, my mind was buzzing with unsettling thoughts. Am I clinging to tradition for fear of facing the unknown? Why does the authority of priests, which should always be unquestionable, now seem like a wall that prevents me from touching the essence of divine love? In the midst of this internal storm, the figure of Sister Evelyn appeared repeatedly, in my thoughts, always representing the security and tradition that I, at the same time, wanted to break. The next morning, still with a heavy heart, I decided to confront these doubts. During collective prayer, when eyes met in search of communion, I felt an irresistible impulse to speak. My voice, initially low and hesitant, gained strength as I asked, "Sisters, how many times have we lost ourselves in routine to the point of forgetting that true faith is not just in repeated words, but in a sincere encounter with God?" A silence followed, and I noticed the shock on some faces while others, like Sister Evelyn, simply nodded with an understanding look, but without responding. At that moment, I felt that the beginning of doubts had turned into a turning point. The tradition that previously supported me now revealed itself as a subtle prison, and the search for a more authentic relationship with the divine began to emerge with overwhelming force. Each ritual, each prayer, began to be questioned, and the absolute certainty that once sustained my faith vanished, giving way to a seductive, yet unsettling openness to new possibilities. On that freezing night, the silence of the convent seemed to carry an ominous portent. While I was in the chapel, kneeling in prayer, a strange and inexplicable sensation began to take hold. Initially, it was just a slight tremor in the body, but it soon developed into an intense weakness, as if an invisible force was draining my vital energy. Candlelight danced on the stone walls, casting shadows that seemed to come to life, and for a brief moment, I heard the sound of my own heart racing, resonating in an uneven rhythm. "Artemis, why don't you get up?" I heard, a distant voice which mixed concern and urgency as the nuns ran towards the chapel. The perception of the sounds around me became confusing, as if I were in a dream where time slowed down and each second stretched infinitely. The feeling of heaviness increased, and my vision began to blur. I felt myself being pulled out of myself, as if a powerful force was dissociating me from my body. Suddenly, I found myself floating above the marble floor, watching, with a serene and curious gaze, the nuns who, with tears in their eyes, tried to revive my inert body. The sound of their murmurs blended into a deep silence, filled only by the irregular beat of time. "Artemis, please come back to us," pleaded a sweet voice, coming from one of the nuns, as she held my hands fervently. However, in that state of near death, I did not respond, as an indescribable and overwhelming peace was already beginning to envelop me. It was as if the weight of existence was dissipating, leaving me light and floating, at the mercy of a spiritual current that carried me beyond the limits of the earthly world. On this threshold between life and death, I was enveloped by a vibrant, warm light so intense that it almost blinded my eyes. This luminosity did not bring the fear of the unknown, but a feeling of welcome and love that I had never experienced. As I got closer, I realized that it wasn't just any light. It was a presence, a pure energy that emanated wisdom and compassion. At that moment, my soul opened to the immensity of feelings and perceptions that overflowed the universe. As I floated in this dimension of pure light, I heard a whisper that seemed to come from within myself. "You are on the brink of eternity. Artemis!" The words reverberated like a call, awakening in me a deep understanding about the fragility of life and the transcendence of existence. Every detail of the chapel, the expressions of the nuns, the distant sound of the bells, all blended into a tapestry of experiences that defied rational explanation. "Don't be afraid," the voice echoed, serene and powerful, as I was drawn hopelessly towards the source of the light. In an instant, I realized that my body was no longer the focus. What mattered was that feeling of purity, the invisible touch of the divine that overflowed in every atom of my being. Time, which was once a prison, now unfolded into infinite possibilities, allowing me to revisit moments from the past and glimpse fragments of an uncertain future. At the same time, an inexplicable dread arose within me, mixed with a feeling of complete surrender. The last barriers between life and death were crumbling, and I found myself facing the abyss of the unknown, ready to cross the border that separates the mortal from the eternal. This experience, terrifying and at the same time deeply liberating, would forever mark my existence. As I floated in this liminal state between life and death, something extraordinary began to happen. My existence unfolded before my eyes in a dizzying sequence of memories and defining moments. I felt as if each beat of my heart was a compass that triggered scenes from a past full of light and shadow. Time no longer has linearity. Every moment, every emotion, was mixed into a kaleidoscope of images that defied understanding. Suddenly, I found myself transported back to my childhood, where faith was taught as if it were an absolute truth. I remember seeing my mother, with a tender and devotional look, praying fervently before the crucifix. His soft voice murmured prayers that, in the innocence of that moment, made me believe that God's love was a protective cloak. At the same time, I visualized the moments when words of comfort were interspersed with stark lessons about the fear of sin and divine punishment. This duality left me with a bittersweet feeling, as I realized how each teaching shaped both my faith and my doubts. As the memories flashed by, I found myself in the convent, where the days were marked by a relentless routine. The scene of myself, kneeling in the chapel, echoed with the repetition of prayers that, over time, seemed to turn into mere automatic rituals. In one of those moments, I remembered Sister Evelyn's voice, saying, "Artemis, why do your prayers seem more like a whisper of doubt than a cry of faith?" These words, spoken with a mixture of affection and disapproval, reverberated within me, leading me to question whether, in the midst of repetition, I had not lost the essence of the encounter with the divine. In a flash, the scenes changed, and I saw the moments of greatest emotional intensity again. I remembered a night when, after an intense prayer, a feeling of emptiness invaded my being, as if the rituals were not enough to fill an inner abyss. At that moment, doubts turned into existential questions. Am I living an illusion? A car of emotions without the true flame of divine love? My memories took me to situations where I sought solace in the words of old sermons, but where behind each teaching lurked a truth that I could not fully understand. As the images continued to flow, I also visualized moments of true connection with God, rare and fleeting, but intense. I saw that moment when, during a solitary prayer, I felt an inexplicable peace, as if heaven itself had come down to embrace me. This feeling contrasted sharply with the times when religion became a mere performance, a lifeless obligation. Heard my own voice, now distant, asking, I lived in two worlds, one of empty rituals and the other of ephemeral experiences of truth. Which one, after all, defined me? These words, filled with anguish and revelation, seemed to ask for answers that only the divine could offer. At the same time, Reviewing my life exposed me to the details I had ignored, the small acts of kindness, the looks of compassion, and the moments when, even if without realizing it, I sought the essence of love that preached faith. Each fragment revealed the duality of a life divided between tradition and the sincere search for spiritual truth. This panoramic vision, intense and painfully revealing, made me understand that, although I had followed the rituals with fervor, there were moments when I became disconnected from the true essence of divine love. The review of my life became a mirror, where I could see both the moments of genuine devotion and the moments of mere empty formality. As the fog of my life review began to lift, I felt myself being carried away by a current of light that seemed to come from a distant, unexplored horizon. On the threshold of this new state of consciousness, I was enveloped by a luminosity that did not belong to this world. It was intense, warm, and welcoming, as if each particle of light carried an immeasurable love. As I advanced, the presence of this light became more concrete and revealed a figure that surpassed all the images I had known until then. From within the glow emerged the figure of Jesus, but it was not the Jesus depicted in statues or paintings that adorned the convent walls. He presented himself in a lively way, with human features, but he radiated an aura of power and tenderness that touched me deeply. Their robes were not the ancient tunics of bygone eras, but displayed a serene, almost ethereal glow that seemed to transcend time. His eyes, full of compassion, penetrated my soul, making me feel completely exposed and, at the same time, welcomed. Artemis, my daughter. His voice sounded in my mind with a clarity that surpassed any earthly sound. You have followed the rituals with devotion, but in your search you have lost yourself in the illusion of formalities. Confused, I felt my heart beat faster as I absorbed every word. In a mix of fear and admiration, I asked, Lord, how can I find the true path if the traditions which I was always taught now prove to be empty? He smiled, a gesture that dispelled any shadow of doubt and, at the same time, carried a depth that filled me with hope. Artemis, the truth does not reside in the mechanical repetitions of rituals, but in a sincere and intimate relationship with me. I have always been here, not as a distant object of worship, but as a loving companion on each soul's journey. As I listened to these words, every trace of his presence became clearer. The light around us pulsed rhythmically, as if responding to the beats of our hearts, and the environment transformed into a scene of absolute peace. In the midst of this encounter, I could feel the pain of my years of doubt and the traces of a faith that, although true, had been obscured by soulless rituals. You have sought salvation in religion, but you forgot to know me, he continued, with a tone that mixed firmness and tenderness. The path of salvation requires that you let go of the traditions that have been imposed on you and surrender to the love that transcends symbols and rituals. With each word, my soul seemed to free itself from invisible shackles, and a feeling of reconnection with the divine invaded every corner of my being. I felt as if time expanded, allowing me to absorb every detail of that unique moment in which the true essence of faith was revealed. In that moment of surrender, the visions of the past and the questions that had tormented me for so long found answers in the simplicity of his gaze. I was no longer alone, and the divine that I had sought so much was there, present in every pulse, in every sigh. The feeling of absolution and peace was mixed with a call to transform my life, to transcend the limits of tradition and live a true relationship with him. As I remained in that state of surrender, the presence of Jesus gently faded, and, in its place, images emerged of a clarity that was as distressing as it was revealing. In a first flash, my eyes were filled with a disturbing vision. Crowds lined up in imposing churches, sitting in cold pews and austere silence, repeating prayers with a mechanical devotion that was more reminiscent of a rehearsed choreography than a sincere encounter with the divine. The voices sounded both distant and desperate, as if each plea was just an echo of an existential void that words could not fill. Why does everyone hide behind empty rituals? I thought, feeling a mix of indignation and sadness as the images intensified. It wasn't just the number of people, but the lost look on their faces, the lack of sparkle in their eyes, as if faith had been drained of its essence by incessant repetition. Soon after, the vision abruptly transformed. I found myself observing a group of priests, among them the well-known Reverend Nathaniel Reed, whose expression was marked by a mixture of compassion and helplessness. They were gathered in a confessional lit by flickering candles, offering words of absolution that sounded more like mere formalities than a communication of divine mercy. "Only God can forgive," I heard one of them whisper, with a tone that couldn't hide the sadness of someone who finds himself unable to touch the core of a human being. The words reverberated like a lament, highlighting the impotence of rituals that, although sacred in appearance, lost their true meaning when devoid of genuine faith. But the third vision was the most unsettling of all. In a scenario where lights flickered and shadows lengthened, I saw people kneeling before images of saints and statues, in a devotion that seemed so fervent to completely ignore the living presence of Jesus. The scene was like a visual metaphor for a cult of appearance. Every gesture, every prayer, was performed with such rigidity that the essence of divine love seemed to have been forgotten. "Look at me. Look at the true face of compassion," shouted a voice that did not belong to any of those present, but that echoed through the walls of the church like an urgent and disconcerting warning. The shocking visions followed in quick succession, each one more piercing and painful than the last. In the midst of this whirlwind of images, a feeling of revolt and hopelessness took over me. It was as if, in each scene, the veil of illusion slowly fell, revealing the sad reality that many were lost in an empty practice of rituals, forgetting that true forgiveness and love did not come from repetitions, but from a sincere encounter with the Creator. As I struggled to absorb the magnitude of these revelations, an inner voice, calm and resolute, cut through the maelstrom. "Artemis, these visions are not to discourage you, but to awaken you to the truth." With tears streaming down my face, I felt that each image, no matter how shocking, carried an urgent lesson. True faith demands more than formalities. It requires the courage to seek the divine beyond symbols and deep-rooted traditions. For a few moments, I was immersed in this sea of revelations, feeling the weight of each vision and the responsibility they brought. The sound of silence seemed to scream, and in that silence, I understood that the destiny of those who lose themselves in rituals is one of loneliness and helplessness, while those who dare to seek the truth face the harsh reality of a world accustomed to illusion. As the visions dissipated, an almost supernatural calm took over that space where time seemed suspended. I found myself alone in the vastness of this experience, and it was then that, gently, a presence began to manifest itself again. It was not the vibrant figure of Jesus that I had already seen, but something deeper, a revelation that surpassed all human understanding. The light around me intensified, as if it were pulsing in sync with the rhythm of my heart, and the atmosphere was filled with a palpable sense of truth. I felt a deep, serene voice, emerging from the silence, as if echoing from all directions, at once. "Artemis, listen to me," said the voice, firm, but with a tenderness that seemed to caress the soul. My body floated, free from earthly shackles, as the words unfolded like a cloak of revelation. Many take comfort in the illusory security of rituals and traditions. The religion they know is built on fragile pillars, forged by repetition and fear. They believe that simply practicing the rituals is enough to guarantee their salvation. But this security is an illusion, the voice continued, as the light around me shone brightly. The revelation began to emerge in my mind. The truth, naked and raw, showed that salvation could not be achieved by mechanical gestures. In the midst of those words, glimpses of a different world emerged. Crowds that sank into empty practices, the authority of priests unable to touch the human heart, and a devotion that was lost among ancestral traditions, forgetting the essence of love that I so longed for. Each image confronted me with the painful reality that faith, when mediated by lifeless rituals, became a mere empty ritual, incapable of transforming the spirit. "Artemis, what do you see now?" the voice asked again, as if wanting to know if I was ready to accept the truth. "I see a sea of illusions, an ocean of hearts lost in routine and complacency," I replied, my voice still trembling, but filled with an understanding that transcends words. The answer came not as a consolation, but as an urgent call to action. The final revelation imposed itself with the force of a gale, revealing that true forgiveness and true salvation could only be achieved through an authentic relationship with the divine. No rituals, no pre-established traditions would be enough to fill the abyss left by spiritual disconnection. "You have taken refuge in shapes and symbols, forgetting that I am always present," declared the voice with conviction. "The security that many find in religion is like an empty shell that keeps them away from the true touch of divine love. Only by letting go of these shackles and sincerely opening your heart will you be able to find the true path to salvation." At that moment, the light began to concentrate on one point, transforming into an almost palpable manifestation of the divine. I felt overwhelmed by a love that could not be defined, a feeling that dissolved all barriers and made me understand that salvation was, above all, an invitation to a direct relationship with Him. "Artemis, go and spread this truth. Let each heart feel the urgency of authentic love, because the time for illusion is over," the voice concluded before falling silent, leaving me alone, but transformed, with the burning mission of sharing this revelation. Every word of the final revelation resonated with me with the intensity of irrevocable destiny. I felt that from that moment on, there was no return to the previous state. The truth had been revealed, and the call to a genuine relationship with the divine was irrevocable and urgent. The moment the final revelation faded, I felt as if an invisible force was pulling me back to the world of the living. It was as if a divine hand rescued me from the abyss where time and space were confused, and I soon found myself being dragged back to my body, as if it, abandoned for a brief moment, was desperately crying out for me. The feeling of return was as abrupt as it was overwhelming. In the blink of an eye, I found myself lying again, cold and motionless, in a hospital bed, surrounded by astonished doctors. Monitors beat frantically, trying to capture signs of life, as professionals gathered in a silent frenzy. One of them, with wide eyes, murmured, "She was declared clinically dead, but now, miraculously, she has returned." I remained oblivious to it all, feeling a peace that contrasted sharply with the chaos unfolding around me. The transition between death and life was accompanied by a strange sense of clarity. It seemed like every cell in my body carried the memory of that encounter with the divine, and the weight of each decision that I could never ignore. As the doctors examine my condition with a mixture of amazement and skepticism, I am approached by faces that now carry different looks. Dorian Blackwood, one of the doctors present, approached with an expression that mixed fascination and doubt. "Artemis, what happened?" he asked, his voice filled with a mixture of scientific curiosity and reverence. I, still with my heart racing, just smiled and murmured, "It's something that words cannot describe, but I know that my mission was drawn on that threshold between life and death." This experience, which to others seemed like a mere inexplicable phenomenon, to me was the transformative milestone of a life that would never be the same. Upon returning, I was received not as the same Artemis who had previously filled herself with mechanical prayers, but as someone who now carried a burden and a light that society did not understand. My soul, renewed and enlightened by the truth, carried the mission of exposing the deceptions of tradition and empty faith. The consequences of this return soon manifested themselves. In the convent, where I once found shelter, the news spread like an uncontrollable fire. Within hours, my experience became the topic of murmurs and intense discussion. Sisters, who previously looked up to me for the security of the rituals, began to regard me with suspicion. Sister Evelyn, always so present and careful, kept her gaze distant and severe, while Reverend Nathaniel Reed, with a face full of internal conflicts, showed a discomfort that had never been expressed before. My family, upon learning of my spiritual resurrection, was quick to react. Disappointed with what they considered a betrayal of the faith that had always sustained our lineage, they unceremoniously disinherited me, leaving me isolated in a sea of judgments. As painful as it was, I understood that the path to truth, despite being enlightened, is lonely and full of sacrifices. Dorian, the doctor who witnessed my return, became an unexpected ally. His incessant questions about the phenomenon he witnessed led him to rethink his convictions and question the rigid separation between science and faith. While some mocked and dismissed my testimony, others, like Scarlett Turner, a young woman searching for meaning lost in her routine, found a spark of hope in my words. Each consequence, each look of disapproval or admiration, served as a constant reminder that true transformation requires courage to face the unknown and break the shackles of tradition. Thus, with a heart marked by experience and the determination to fulfill the mission entrusted to me, I accepted my new destiny, knowing that the path of genuine faith is paved with sacrifices and, at the same time, with the promise of salvation that goes beyond appearances. When the calm set in after the whirlwind of experiences that transformed my life, I felt, deep down, the weight of responsibility that now rested on me. Even though the echo of the visions and revelations remained vivid in my mind, I was urged to translate these experiences into an urgent call, to alert the world to the illusion of empty rituals and traditions that often cover up the true essence of divine love. In the dim light of my hospital room, where rumors of my miraculous return still permeated the hallways, I found myself face to face with the reality that my every word carried transformative potential. Dorian Blackwood, the doctor who had witnessed the inexplicable resuscitation, approached again, this time with a face that mixed curiosity and compassion. "Artemis, you understand that what you experienced is not something that many can accept, right?" he said, his voice full of apprehension. I sighed, looking at the windows that revealed the Boston skyline, where the city continued its routine, indifferent to spiritual crises. "Dorian, this is precisely the message I need to convey. Many get lost in the security of traditions and rituals without realizing that the true path to salvation requires a genuine connection with Jesus." I responded with the conviction of someone who has seen the abyss and returned to warn about the danger of complacency. The call to my mission came not only from Jesus, but also from the painful confrontation with the consequences of my spiritual rebirth. Being rejected by the church and my own family was a blow that, although devastating, confirmed that what I had experienced was beyond common human understanding. Every tear and every word of reproach I received turned into powerful fuel for the greater purpose, awakening those who settle into a mechanical faith, who take refuge in rituals without the warmth of an authentic relationship with the divine. In long conversations with Scarlett Turner, a young woman who found a spark of hope in my story, I began to articulate my message more clearly and boldly. "Scarlett, listen to me well. The religion that many follow is not the true road to divine love," I said with a firm gaze, as she wrote down each word with eyes wide with fascination. "But Artemis, If there is no salvation in tradition, then where should we look for the truth? She asked, hesitant but eager to understand what was beyond what she had been taught since childhood. My answer was simple, but filled with a depth that only real experience can confer. The truth is in a personal relationship with Jesus. It's not about following formulas or repeating prayers like an empty mantra, but about opening your heart to the love he offers us. It takes courage to abandon the security built by traditions and seek a living, pulsating, and transforming faith. In the stillness of the early morning, while the world slept, I found myself reflecting on the warning I needed to share. In solitary prayers, I felt the weight of time running out, an urgency that came from the voice of Jesus, which urged me to act before it was too late. Artemis, go and make each soul awaken, said the memory of that divine encounter. And so I decided, I will not be a mere spectator of my own revelation. I will make every word, every experience, a cry that breaks the barriers of conformity and leads people to question what really connects them to the divine. Over the next few days, I began conversations with those who were willing to listen, even though most rejected my testimony with mockery and fear. Every encounter, every dialogue, was an opportunity to reinforce the warning. Are you following Jesus or just religion? These words, repeated with fervor and sincerity, reverberated like a warning to sleeping hearts. My mission was clear: to alert the world about the deception that makes many feel saved just by belonging to an institution. True salvation, I learned, lies in intimacy with Jesus, a personal, ongoing journey that requires not only faith, but also the courage to challenge the status quo